The most important part of your presentation is your call to action. And in this video, we're going to create a speaker preparation checklist that is going to highlight your call to action in all the different places where it needs to be. In addition, we're going to look at some best practices on how you actually incorporate that call to action in your preparation. Welcome to the live stream. My name is Markus Seppälä. I'm a TEDx speaker, a stand-up comedian, and I'm passionate about bringing more fun to the corporate stage. By the end of this video, we're going to create together a speaker checklist that will help you get ready when it's your time to prepare so that you don't forget anything. And today's live stream is a bit of a collaborative effort. We're going to create this checklist in real time. But let's talk about the call to action first and why I think a call to action is so important. If you are doing any kind of presentation, the assumption is that you want your audience to do something. If you don't want your audience to do something after your presentation is over, then why are you even presenting? Right? The call to action, I think, is such an important part because it serves the ultimate goal of your presentation. And that call to action could be something very specific. It could be click on this link, sign up for this thing, try this product, that people can do immediately. It can be something that happens during the presentation where you have multiple calls to action. For example, hit like on this video, that could be one. It could be that you want somebody to approve a proposal that you put together. You want them to buy something from you. You want to encourage them to go and clean up the oceans, whatever it may be. But I think that call to action really focuses all the attention on why are you even doing the presentation in the first place. So let's start with a couple of examples of calls to action on a presentation like this, which is based here on the web. And I'm going to give you some bad, or I'm going to give you some simple examples that are not particularly impressive, and then I'm going to show you some more advanced ones as we go along. The first one I want to talk about is directing people to click a link in your video description, or if you're doing this on Zoom, it could be in the chat, wherever it is. I often say something like, if you want more information, then check out the links in the video description. The problem with this is that for people who are not familiar with YouTube, they may not know what a video description even is. So here's how I usually help them along when my call to action is based on clicking a link. The first thing I do is that I say that there are links in the description below the video. And if you don't know how to open that video description, if you're watching this on a computer, just click show more under the video. And if you're watching this on a phone, then just click the down arrow to open the video description. So this is my first tip, is to really help your audience understand how they should execute the action that you ask them to do. And you should make it easy for them to do so. Now, clicking a link in the video description is pretty easy if you're watching this on a computer or a phone, but you may not always see the description. For example, if you're watching this full screen, there is no video description. So the next step in helping your audience take the action that you want are going to be around making it easy for them to find those links. So let's start with the simple examples now. The software that I'm using to live stream this is called Melon. And in the video description, there is an affiliate link for Melon. And I'm going to put it on the screen just so that you can see one of the problems. Here is the affiliate link for Melon. You see that it's melonapp.com != ref, this and that. And then it has Markus Seppälä there with these A's with dots. And those are not easy for people to spell, especially on a phone, if they're not familiar with Scandinavian characters. So how can we improve this? I'll show you another example. Here on my screen, I now have an alternative URL that goes to the same place. It's markuspresents.com /go/melon. It has no weird characteristics, and while it is a little bit long, it is still easier to remember that even if you don't have it in front of you. If you're just listening to this, for example, which actually is how a lot of content is consumed these days, people only listen. So when I say something like markuspresents.com/go/melon, it is possible that you're going to be able to type that in, even if you don't see it on the screen, like so. So that's kind of a basic example. Let's take this up one step when it comes to your calls to action. Because the next example that I want to give you is a link to my online course. And what my online course can actually help you do is share slides like this. So let's go back to this slide, for example. So the tool that I use to share slides like this, I can also put my camera up here in the corner. I can remove it completely. I can go back to my webcam, and then I can bring it back like this as well. And the tool that I use for this is called OBS Studio, and I have a course that will teach you exactly how to do that. I'm going to put the address here on the screen as well, so you can see the next level of this problem. Here is that address for my course. markuspresents.thinkific.com/course/OBS for video conferencing. Not a very memorable URL. So what is the alternative? I'm going to put that on the screen as well. I'm going to do it two different ways. This one, markuspresents.com/OBS. That is easy to remember, that is easy to type, that is easy to understand, and much more so than what you saw before. So here's an example of how you can make it easy for your listeners, your audience, to take the action that you want. But let's take this one step further as well, because I'm going to remove it from the screen there, and then I'm going to show you how I'm actually doing it these days. So if you want to check out my course, go to markuspresents.com/OBS. So now it has these animations, it has this logo and all of that, and this is actually done with OBS Studio itself. So that was the second example of making it easy for your audience to take an action. But my favorite example is going to be from my stand-up comedy course. And I'm going to start once again by putting the full URL on the screen right now. And you can see here that it is udemy.com/courses/stand-up comedy for beginners. Then there's a question mark, reference, all this. Nobody's going to be able to type that in. Like if it's just in the description, you could click it. That's not a problem, but nobody's going to be able to type that in. So the alternative that I've prepared for this particular example is that I have my own domain for it. It's comedyforbeginners.com. Very simple. If you want to learn stand-up comedy for beginners, then go to comedyforbeginners.com. So I hope you're starting to see that these examples are all kind of illustrations of how important it is to make it easy for your audience to take the action that you want them to do. Now, these examples, and this is going to go on our checklist as well, but these examples are, of course, just based on something that you're doing on the web, where there is a video description to click, for example. But this could also be on Zoom. You could just paste in the URL in the chat, and that might work, but it's not going to work for everybody. People who joined after you pasted it, they will not see it, for example. But what about if you're doing this on stage? If you're doing this on stage and you want people to take an action, it's equally important for them to be able to do it easily. So that example with comedyforbeginners.com, that's something that people can remember even after the presentation, and not the udemy.com one. But of course, your call to action could be, go put your name on this list, go support ocean cleanup with the project that we're launching in the company tomorrow. Go, if we're talking about doing a comedy show, for example, the call to action could be to go and buy this special drink offer that the bar is having here today. So always when you have a call to action, make it very easy for them to action it. Another example from the comedy show, one of the calls to action is often, if you want to perform stand-up comedy on my stage at the next show, then here's what you do. And what you do is either you can come and talk to me in the break, you can sign up on the Facebook event, or you can write a message to Comedy Basel, which is my show, for example. So keep that in mind to make it easy for your audience to take the action that you actually want them to do. I'm going to share one more example with you, which kind of combines a little bit of both, and this will work equally in a on stage and in an online world as well. And that is to give them a QR code, or as in this case, actually two different choices. The example that you see on screen is from my Toastmasters Club, and this link gives you the next meeting's agenda or the current meeting's agenda. So you can either go to the short address bis-tm.org/agenda, or you can scan the QR code. And both of these are easy to execute for people who come into the meeting and they, I don't have the agenda in front of me, how do I get it? They can walk up to the projector and scan the QR code or type in the URL. So I really encourage you to think about making it easy for your audience to execute on the call to action. If your call to action is something that will take a little bit more preparation, like, let's take that away, like signing up for a cause, going to an event that happens in the future, then make it easy there too. Either give them a little URL, send them an email, give them a flyer, do something like that. So what I'm going to put on the screen now is the beginning of my speaker checklist, because we're going to work on it together today. I'm going to share something on the screen, and it's going to be a very advanced tool. It's called Microsoft Word. We're going to type this speaker checklist up here together. So the first idea here is the call to action. So, and I'm going to worry a little bit more about the formatting later, but let's say that the main call to action here is that you should be clear on your CTA. What do you want the audience to do? I think that's a very important part. The next point here on the checklist is make it easy for them to take the action. And here you can use pretty URLs, you can use flyers, you can use QR codes, you can send reminders, all of these things as well. And as we flesh out this, I think I'm going to put those examples here as well. We can put something down. Let's do a couple of examples. So let's do pretty URLs, QR codes, flyers, handouts, for example. And that also worked well in a comedy show. Okay, we're moving on. We're going to look at the next block of things that we need on our call to action. But there is one more, just on the call to action, there is one more item that I do want to add, actually. So you as the presenter, and this is a way to bring your calls to action to that next level. You as the presenter, of course, have the responsibility of making sure that the audience takes that call to action. But you can enlist some support. You can specifically enlist the help of the host, the MC of the event. If you enlist the help of the MC, that means that you're going to brief them on what the call to action is, and then they're going to reinforce it. So let's take an example here. If not so relevant example, but let's take that Melon link exactly. So if I say in my presentation, go to markuspresents.com/go/melon to sign up for Melon, and then I finish my presentation, the MC can then come up and say, hey, thank you, Markus, for that presentation. Remember, the link is markuspresents.com/go/melon. And that is a really powerful way of reinforcing your call to action. And this is something that we did at the TEDx event that I organized in 2019 as well. We had one of the speakers had a very specific call to action. They wanted us to go and look at a specific device that he left on stage. And he said it at the end of his speech, but then I, as the MC, also reinforced that message. So always enlist the help of the MC to help you with your call to action. That's going to make it more memorable for the audience. So let's put that as another point here. Enlist the help of the MC. Let's see, to remind audience of call to action. It's a pretty good start with the calls to action here. I'm going to quickly move around something here on my stream. All right. Hey, welcome to the live stream, by the way. I'm happy that you're here. And we're going to cover about 5 or 6 more items that we want to have on our checklist. But feel free to chime in the chat, or if you're watching this on the replay, join in on the comments. What do you think we should have on our speaker checklist? Like, what is the thing that you're actually struggling with in this area? All right. And I'm also going to have a quick look here at the poll that I had on the YouTube. I asked, what is the most important part of your presentation? And I had 3 questions. I had 3 options: introduction, slides, and call to action. And I'm happy that about 40% of you have chosen call to action. But the introduction is actually something that, should we do a bonus tip? Let's do a little bonus tip here right in the middle. The introduction is something that people think is super important in a presentation. But the best way, the absolutely best way to introduce yourself, or rather the absolutely best way to do an introduction, is that the MC does the introduction. You should, if you're doing your own introduction, you're doing something wrong. Always make sure to send your introduction the way you wrote it to the MC and let them introduce you instead. And that means that you can jump straight into the content. Okay, bonus tip over. We're going to continue with the next item on the list. I'm going to refer back to my notes here. By the way, this is a bit of a different live stream. We're doing live content creation. This is not as well planned out as it usually is. The next thing that I want to add to the speaker checklist here is details about the event. And this is something that that may sound obvious, but I think it's really important to get these things right. And I'm going to start by just writing a few items here. So let's do event details. And this is basically what are the details of the event where you're speaking. And I'm going to put down there the things that may sound obvious, but I'm going to come back and explain why they're not. So let's do the name, the title, the location, and the organizer. Really make sure that you have a firm grip of these things. And the event title may sound like the most obvious thing. You know what the conference is about. I have produced in the past a show called Comic Strip, which is a combination of stand-up comedy and burlesque. It's a wonderful show, and Comic Strip is such a brilliant name for that show. But the problem is that a lot of people call it comedy strip. And comedy strip is not a word, whereas comic strip is a word. And it annoys me to no end when people are calling it comedy strip, where we came up with a very clever name of comic strip. So I think it's super important that you, as kind of a representative of the event where you're presenting, you should at least have the absolutely correct name of the thing. If I take an example from the Toastmasters world, people often get district and division, for example, confused. But if you are at the district conference, you should know that is the district conference. The next couple of items on the list here, because these are the checklists that I recommend you go through in order to prepare for your presentation. And the next item here is, if it's a virtual presentation, it's super important to have the video conferencing link, right? Or live streaming link, whatever it is. So let's do a video conferencing link. And so that you have that ready in your notes, and you don't have to look for it in your emails. Because if you arrive late because you didn't find it, maybe you had it in your work email and you're joining in from your home email, whatever it may be, have the video conferencing link. That is absolutely critical if you're going to prepare a good presentation. So event details, I think that's the second most important block, so that you get them right. Next, I want to add so everything in that block in the event details were about the event. Now on the checklist, I want to add some things that relate to your speech. And some of these are going to be a little bit unusual, but let me know in the chat if this resonates with you or not. Because the next, I'm going to call it, so this is information about your speech, but I'm going to call it copy. Copy just means, words, like in the word copywriting, writing, titles and descriptions. That's copy. So for your own speech or presentation, you of course want to have the. Actually, I'm going to make a little change here. I'm going to highlight that is the event title. Now we're down in copy. I'm going to call it the presentation title. Obviously I can't spell, but that's okay. That's not required. Presentation title is one of those things that should be on the checklist. And the reason why it's at the top of the checklist is that people so often forget this. And I'll tell you who forgets the presentation title. The speaker forgets the presentation title because they might not even have one. They might be asked, oh, so what's the topic of your presentation? And then they just say the topic. But the coming up with a presentation title is much more. A presentation title will make a promise. It will give you an idea what is in it for me if I go and listen to this presentation. It's not only about the topic. So, for example, today we're doing a little bit more of an impromptu live stream, but if I had spent a little bit more time on the title of this presentation, it could have been something like how to prepare correctly for your presentation with my speaker preparation checklist. Right? It makes a promise. So have your presentation title ready. So who else forgets about the presentation title? Most MCs forget about the presentation title. They often, it's often shown on the slides in the lecture hall, for example, but the MC so often forgets to say it. So the presentation title is really important. And since you are responsible for it, make sure that that gets to the organizers in time as well. So what else do we need about, what other kind of information do we need about your presentation? This is where we're going to come back to what we were talking about before, because the other two main blocks of the copy are the description of your presentation or your session, and then your bio. And let's start with the bio first, because that is, for many speakers, it is unfamiliar territory. If you are going to present at a conference, you will need to supply just a few words, a couple of sentences with biographical information. And that you can get started with just 50 words. 50 words is a really good place to start. But most people don't have this. And I remember when I organized the TEDx event in 2019, most people just use kind of something from their LinkedIn profile or their career history as their bio. But that's not good enough. If you want to stand out, you should have a bio that tells the audience why they should come and listen to you. You know, what is your area of expertise? What style do you bring? So parts of my bio, for example, is that what I said in the beginning of this live stream is that I'm passionate about bringing more fun to the corporate stage. That says, that also kind of makes a promise about what you will get if you book me. So write your own bio, and I know that's hard. I know it's hard, like especially in those TEDx events where I've been involved. People who are not performers, they don't have bios, and this might take you a week to write, even if it's only 50 words. And also write it in third person. Do not write, I am a corporate speaker, rather say Markus Seppälä is a corporate speaker, passionate about fun on stage. But now we'll come back to the item below, the item above, the description of your event. Why is this description essential? Well, this is really what's going to tell the audience when they're looking through the conference program, is your session worth going to? What am I actually going to learn in that session? So really make sure to highlight the value that the audience are going to get out of going to your session. But there's a little bit more to that description, because if you really want to level up your description, think of incorporating that call to action that we looked at before. You can have, in most cases, when it comes to a description, you can actually add a link there. So or you could do this in the bio as well. So the bio could, for example, could link to your LinkedIn profile or to your website or whatever it may be, whatever your preferred social media platform is. So that's an opportunity for you to enhance that call to action. And if your description includes a link to go download your checklist, for example, or to sign up for your newsletter, whatever it may be, consider including that in the description. I'll give you an example. A couple of months ago, I did a workshop about how to organize effective hybrid meetings. And on my YouTube channel, I have probably 20 different videos about effective hybrid meetings. So in the event description, I included a link to the playlist. And it wasn't the ugly, the ugly youtube.com/xyzzz URL, but rather I made it a pretty one. It's markuspresents.com/play/hybrid. So include, or at least consider, how does your description interact with the call to action that you are going to be delivering at the presentation? Because that also makes it easy that if people didn't catch the URL, for example, in your presentation, they can go back and click it in the program or in the email. So do make sure to leverage the space that you have in the description. So let's put that on there as a little sub-bullet here, including call to action. So you're seeing here now that we already have 3 examples of where you can incorporate your call to action. One is in your own presentation, the second one is in the MC's thank you block essentially, and the third one is in the description. This is why I wanted to focus the entire checklist on that one call to action, or potentially multiple calls to action as well. And especially if one of them is small, like this reminds me, by the way, you can also have smaller calls to action. For example, I might say if my presentation, you may have heard this before, if my presentation is about my journey to Nepal, I might ask somewhere in my presentation, if you've ever been to Nepal, please raise your hand now, or type 1 in the chat, whatever it may be. And that's a call to action that is well designed because it gives you as an audience member a very easy way to answer that call to action, to take that action, specifically just by raising your hand, or if this is on Zoom, just clicking the hand up icon, for example. So just a little side point about the calls to action. By the way, now we're sidetracking this, but this is another important lesson. If you ask your audience any kind of question, I always recommend that you make it explicit how they should answer. Because a worse version of that same example is if I say something like, who here has been to Nepal? That is a horrible way to ask a question, because I'm giving you no instructions on how to answer it. And then if nobody answers, does that mean that they're unsure, or that they haven't been, or they don't want to answer? Like a null answer to that question is worth nothing. That's why raise your hand if you've ever been to Nepal is a much better call to action. And then it's actually not even a question anymore. I have a whole workshop on how to ask audience questions. If you're interested in that, let me know. It's I think I go through like 5 different ways of asking audience questions to build genuine engagement with them. Most of it is things that I've learned at the Comedy Club. And there's contact details to me in the video description below this video. Let's move over. So that's a little bit about the copy. We talked about the bio as well, but there's the one thing that I want to add to this copy. So you as the presenter, you have to come up with your own presentation title, a description that includes that calls to action, your bio, but you should also prepare an introduction. Let's type that again, introduction. And the reason why you should prepare your own introduction is that if you don't do it, then it'll be garbage. If you're relying on the MC to come up with their introduction, it is going to be wrong, or it's going to be awkward, or it's going to be too long, or it's going to be too short, it's going to be inaccurate. It will be wrong if you don't write it. So this is why I'm putting this in the same block on the checklist, because it's as important as everything else when it comes to preparing your material. So let's put that back on the screen there. So now we have presentation title, description, your bio, and your introduction. Super important kind of metadata about your presentation. The next block that I want to talk about here is your notes, because we're doing a checklist here, of course, on everything that you should prepare in order to have a successful presentation, and I think your notes is one of them. Now, I'm not saying you should have everything written down word for word. You definitely shouldn't, but it is a good idea to have some kind of notes, for example. So for this session right here, I have some rudimentary notes that I refer to every now and again, but really make sure that you have them and that they are easily available when you do lose your train of thought, for example. If you want to bring them on paper, you can fold a piece of paper twice to get a nice palm-sized note booklet. I don't know what to call it. So that's one way to do it. Or what I actually prefer is to have all my notes in some kind of cloud service, like Google Doc, for example, that you can then access from your computer or from your phone. I think that's really important. And if I remember correctly, at my TEDx event in 2019, I made all my notes in Microsoft Word, and then I had it on OneDrive so that I could bring a printed version of it, and then I could also access it from my phone. So let's put here, let's add something to our document here, notes as a main heading. Let me know what you think so far. Are these things that you always prepare for a presentation? And by the way, you notice here that all of these are not the content itself. Like, this is not the speech. This is about the speech. And I think that it's really important to remember to prepare all of that. Next up, on our checklist. There's actually one more thing that I want to say about the notes before we move over, and that is that in your notes, if you have kind of an outline of everything that you want to cover, there's one powerful thing that you can do here with your notes, and that is, put that to normal, and that is that you can incorporate that call to action that we talked about before in multiple different places. So if you need to be reminded that after you make your third point, you need to ask the people to hit like on the video, for example, put that in your notes. So I'm going to type that, include CTA, so that you don't forget the call to action, which is in fact the most important thing in a presentation. Okay, let's move over to the next block here, and that is going to be a new heading. And here I want to talk about equipment. This is an important part of the checklist, and this is kind of not exactly in your control, but I think it's really important to do it. And there's two aspects that I want to cover with equipment. The first one is that if you're not familiar with the equipment in that particular venue where you're going to be presenting, do make sure to test it beforehand. Even if you're an experienced speaker, do make an effort to test it. If you are able to arrive the day before and test it, that's a great way to do it. If you're able to do it an hour before, that's a great way to do it. If you only have 5 minutes before you're up, that's also a great place to do it. If you have support from somebody who does tech at the event, they can definitely help you out. But do take the time to test the equipment, because there are always things that could go wrong. If you get a choice, for example, of not using a microphone or using a microphone, then you know that you're at the wrong event and they don't know what they're doing, because the people organizing it, they should tell you to use a microphone if there is one. One thing that I always, when it comes to choices, if I can choose between a kind of a headset microphone that hangs here or a handheld microphone like this one, then 100% time I'm going to select a handheld microphone like this, just because that helps me feel a little bit more at home on stage. So for the tech, let's see what we add for our next heading here. Equipment. So test. Let's call that test beforehand. Really make every effort to test it beforehand. At the comedy club, usually I'm there about 3 hours before the show starts to set up everything and test it. And when people arrive an hour before, or they arrive 5 minutes before, I usually insist on them testing the microphone. And this is also important. This is actually not so. This is not most important for the people who are there, but it's super important for the recording. If the event is recorded, I think it's essential that you get a high quality recording. The next item on our equipment list, and put that back on the screen. The next item on the equipment checklist is that it's not really only about the physical equipment, but I also want to add something here, and I'm going to call it I'm going to call it test settings in video conferencing software. And this is an important part. Let's do it like that. This is an important part as well when you're presenting online. There are some things that may or may not work initially. For example, is screen sharing allowed? Has the host allowed you to share their screen? Is the chat available? If you're going to ask for somebody to click a link that you post in the chat, you have to have the right to post in the chat, for example. Same thing here on this live stream. The chats are currently enabled here on Twitch and on YouTube, but if I asked you a question and you were not able to actually answer that with a chat message, that wouldn't really help it, right? So really check the settings, and maybe we should expand on that. So I'm going to video conferencing or streaming software. So what are those settings? Let's make a little list here. Let's make a little list of the settings here. So screen sharing, is that enabled? Chat, is that enabled? Another thing is also the recording. Like, do you want the recording of it? And is it enabled in Zoom or Teams that you're actually allowed to make a recording? So that's an important part as well. And I think there was something else that I wanted to add on there. Oh yes, spotlighting the speaker. And this is, I'm including this especially because what I'm talking about here, by the way, is that if I'm in a Zoom call and then I'm spotlighted, then I'm going to go full screen on everybody, even if I'm not sharing anything on my screen. And in fact, that is how I present. I never ever use screen sharing when I'm doing Zoom. I'm using OBS Studio to share all my visuals within my own video feed, so it doesn't actually go full screen. So OBS Studio is the software that I'm doing this with, and so I also use it in Zoom, and it works exactly like you see it working here. And you can get it from there, markuspresents.com/OBS. That's my online course. So if you have all these things in place, you have your screen sharing, your spotlighting, your chatting, and the recording enabled, then you don't have to worry about it when it happens. So why is this near and dear to me? I did a presentation a few months ago where I was using OBS to share my slides, and I asked the tech person to spotlight me. I asked them like an hour before, I asked them 5 minutes before, and I asked them, but then when I actually started speaking, they did not spotlight me. And unfortunately, it was just because they didn't understand what I meant. My bad, huh? I should have checked if they understand what it means to spotlight. And in Zoom, it's you right-click the person and then you say spotlight for everybody. And the person just didn't understand my request. So my mistake, huh? But that's another part. Like, when you think of how you want to look on your video conference, you have to make sure that people understand what you actually mean. Same thing if you're doing this on stage. If the performer wants a different type of lighting, or they want some audio effects on the mixing desk, or if they want to turn off the projector for their blog, this is actually really important as well. I'm actually gonna add it. I'm gonna add that. See, this is good co-creation. I'm gonna add it to the equipment here, and I'm gonna say any special requests for AAV, which stands for audio visuals, those you have to come with them very early. And when I'm producing a show, if somebody comes with a last minute request like that, that stresses me out. And the example, I was at a meeting the other day. Somebody wanted to share some slides in a hybrid meeting, and sharing visual aids in a hybrid meeting is much more complicated than doing it in an online only or in-person only. And well, I'm not going to shame this person. It stressed me out that request came so late. Okay, let's move over to the next item on our checklist here, and let me know if there's something missing from the checklist when you're preparing for your speech. The next block that I want to cover here is that you should think about. Let's see. I'm just looking at my notes here and see if I potentially forgot something. I'm going to go back here. I am going to go back because I did mention this, but I forgot to put it on the list. So I'm going to go back to the block about the description and the introduction that you should prepare for the MC. And I'm going to add that extra point where I encourage you to enlist the MC. I had it somewhere else, right? Okay, so we have I mentioned the call to action up there, and I'm gonna put it in here with call to action in thank you block. So the introduction, you should write the introduction that should support the call to action, but then when the MC comes afterwards, they have an opportunity to reinforce that call to action in their thank you block. Okay, now we're actually going to move over to the next point, and that is backups. If you are presenting in person, or if you're presenting virtually, something will go wrong. Something will go wrong. There will be an audio delay on your video, like I've had in a few live streams recently. The internet connection is going to fail 30 minutes before your live stream starts, which happened to me just a few days ago. You will forget your slides. The lights are not going to work. The microphone is not going to work. All of these things happen all the time. And you as a speaker, you have to be ready for that. And think about what are the backup solutions that are available to you when that happens. When it comes to the material that you need on your for your presentation, for example, let's say that you have slides or music or something, it's always a good idea to have them on your laptop. But in addition, when I produce shows, I have, let's say that I'm talking about comic strip once again, when I bring the music that the artists are going to use, I have those files on my laptop, I have them on a separate USB drive, and I have them on a cloud service as well, specifically Google Drive. So when one of those things fails, I have two backups. So I think it's essential that you have backups in whatever you're doing for your presentation. So backups is certainly key. And now I'm just going to put down some ideas here. Let's say that the example that I mentioned there was materials. Let's say that slides, music, video, whatever it is, what kind of media it is that you're going to be presenting, you have to have backups of those. But there's a second class of backups that I want you to consider as well, and that is equipment. So let's put equipment there. Because here's the thing, if even the equipment is going to fail. Sometimes your microphone setup is not going to work. Sometimes your camera is not going to work. And if something happens right now on this particular live stream, here's my backup solution right here. Got my phone. Because I'm running this on Melon, I can switch over the entire live stream to my phone. The video quality, because of my camera quality on the phone, is going to be a little bit lower, but I'm going to be able to continue the presentation after a 30-second stressful panic break, of course. So that always think about that backup in terms of my equipment. And in order for me to use my phone for this, I would just put it on a little tripod. Or if I had the real presence of mind, I could even put it on my camera tripod. I could just put a little clamp on there. So that's a really powerful way of thinking ahead. Because when you have a backup solution, that will reduce your stress. And that is the main value of it. It's also great when something actually goes wrong and you have to use the backup, but I think it reduces your stress. That is the primary function of having a backup system. So another example is that in the venue, there's probably multiple microphones. If this microphone fails right now, I can just get a conference speakerphone, I can get my boundary mic, I can use a headset mic. There's always these things. So we have your materials and your equipment on your backup. And I want to share a little bit. I want to share a little bonus tip for you here as well. I'm not going to put this on the checklist because it doesn't really apply. But what about if one of the performers is not able to perform? What if that performer is you? What if you're not able to come to the show? Is somebody else going to be able to step in last minute and deliver your presentation? Potentially, yes. If you have a colleague who you worked with on that presentation, they might be able to step in last minute. This happens at quite a lot of conferences. Another alternative is that maybe that session is canceled if there are multiple parallel sessions. That's also okay. At the TEDx event in 2019 that I organized, we even had a backup MC. So I was the project manager and the host, the MC. But we did have this contingency plan that if I get run over by a bus that day, we're actually going to have the head of communications of our affiliate would come and MC the event instead. So he had the script ready to go and everything. I was very happy that I was able to complete that task. It was one of my favorite things that happened in 2019. But we even had a backup MC. Same thing if you're organizing a show. If you have 8 performers who are going to be on your comedy stage and then 2 of them cancel, what are you going to do? Are you going to give everybody a little bit more time? Yeah, probably yes. Are you going to give one of them an extra long slot? Yeah, that could also work. But always think about those backups is my recommendation for any kind of speech preparation. So let's have a look at our checklist here, and let me know if something is missing. Let's go through the checklist here. So we covered, let's see, I think this is about 6 blocks or something like that. So the central idea here is the call to action, that you should, when you prepare your speech, that call to action should be the absolute most important part of your presentation. So think about that in making it easy for your audience to actually take the action. That means also giving clear instructions. Make sure that you have all the event details and that they are correct. It's comic strip, not comedy strip. Make sure that you have the video conferencing link on multiple devices. If you have to log in from your phone instead of from your laptop, make sure that you have the link there. Next up, we have your own copy. Your presentation title should be a promise that you will then deliver on to the audience. Have that ready and make it compelling. You can even, here's a little bonus tip for you. You can even use tools that help you write better headlines. There are multiple headline analyzers online. I use one from CoSchedule. There's actually a video about that coming up out on Tuesday, I think, on my channel. And it will help you analyze the quality of your headline. Is it emotionally captivating? Does it have power words? Is it the right length? How does it compare to other headlines on that same topic? So that title is super important. The description, bio with the potential or additional links, and then your introduction. Always write your own introduction. If you don't, it'll be garbage. Make sure that you have your notes and that you are familiar with the equipment, and not only the physical equipment, also the settings, so that you have the rights to do everything that you want, like share screen, chat, for example. And then always have backup plans. Have backup plans, have backup equipment, and having those will help you de-stress. And when you actually have to go to your backup system, you will know, you'll be ready for it. Bonus tip, by the way, practice on your backup system as well. That's how you don't get stressed, is that if you can just within 30 seconds, 60 seconds, if you can just smoothly move over, okay, this didn't work, let's move over to a backup system. Here's an example of a backup system for my hybrid meetings. In a hybrid meeting, we have people on site and others online, and the backup system that I always have in mind is that if the Wi-Fi connection completely fails, can we run the whole hybrid meeting just on phones? And when the Wi-Fi failed the last time, we ran the entire meeting just with phones. 2 mobile phones with data connection and a conference speakerphone. That means that we got rid of the fancy camera, we got rid of the projector, got rid of the fancy slides, but we were able to still complete the meeting just with phones because we had thought about how do we actually handle this if everything fails. And that leads us to the end of my list here, and I'm going to make this checklist available later on once I make it a little bit prettier. And most likely it will also have a pretty URL. Might be something like markuspresents.com/speak, because this is the prototype for my ready to speak checklist. Let's see what happens there. So I'm going to stop that screen sharing there as well. And listen, if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them now. But before that, let me also recommend another video, because today we talked about the importance of including the call to action in your thank you block. But there are many ways that when you are hosting an event, there are many ways that you can actually thank the speaker that will help them reinforce their message and help them be successful. So to watch that video about how to properly thank a speaker, click or tap the screen right here.